Later on in the session, we'll be taking a screen grab of everybody so that we can have a lovely photograph to share in our community newsletter snapshot. So I hope this is all right. So for anyone just joining, please do continue to add into the chat your name, the organisation you work for, the size of the organisation, and where in the world you're joining us from. Welcome to everyone. So in terms of what to expect from the session today, we are very lucky to have 3 experts with us. This is our first Ask the Expert session on leadership development and development pathways. So a warm welcome to our experts, Philippa Frankl, Operations Director at Global Schools Forum, Rahel Wondwossen, Chief of Schools at Nova Pioneer, and Ghazala Nadeem, Executive Vice President, HR Technology and Organisation Excellence at the Citizens Foundation. And these experts are going to be opening our session very shortly and telling us how they approach leadership development and development pathways in their organisations before answering your questions on this topic. And the majority of the session is dedicated to a discussion and to hearing from you. So we really want to be able to answer your questions and shed some light on these topics to support the work you're doing in your organisations. We'll end with a quick wrap up and share contact details and next steps. And just to reiterate that this is a space for open conversation, open learning. So feel free in the discussion section to unmute and share your questions as we go along. Pop your questions into the chat at any time and we can pick those up. And if you are able to keep cameras on, that would be great. And if you are able to put any of the distractions aside for the hour that we're together, that would be much appreciated. So what is Ask the Expert? Well, this is our first session today. And this is a new recurring online session designed for our community to answer pressing questions and help with answers and solutions on operational issues within from experts within the GSF community and our wider network. We're starting with leadership development and development pathways today, but we'll be covering different topics in the future, and we're really looking forward to hearing from you about what topics we should cover. And there'll be an opportunity at the end of each Ask the Expert session to share with us what you would like to hear. So we understand that many organisations within our community are scaling, and with this comes challenges around developing staff, around routes to leadership, once staff are recruited, how do we invest in continuous development, and many more questions. And that's why today we're really hoping to give you some guidance around some of these issues today. These sessions are for you, so please do ask questions today. That's why these sessions will be really valuable and useful to your work. And as well as the dedicated discussion and Q&A time, please, like I said, feel free to drop questions in the chat as we go along. You'll also have the experts' contact details at the end, so if you think of other questions that you'd like to follow up with, that's absolutely fine. So, our experts, welcome to Philippa, Rahel and Ghazala, who are kindly here today to share their expertise with us on leadership development and development pathways. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from each of you on how you approach this topic and hearing a little bit about each of your organisations, which are all very different. So I'm going to be stopping sharing my screen very shortly, and as I come to each of you, it would be great if you could also introduce yourselves as well. And Rahel, I'd love to come to you first, if that's okay. I know that Nova Pioneer, you have this mix of staff managers who are in schools and not in schools. You have this mix, and I think that's really interesting for a lot of our community who also are similar in this way. So I would love to ask you, how do you approach leadership development and development pathways with managers operating in these different settings?
Thanks, Steph. And welcome, everyone. I'm always very nervous about the term expert, but I will say that we are all learning and building programming and looking forward to also learning from all of you. I know many of the organizations here, which is really exciting, but Nova Pioneer, we currently operate 16 schools, specifically in Africa, so South Africa and in Kenya. And we have doubled in size over the last 4 years. And so this idea around how do we train our leaders and how do we support our leadership pathways has been a huge focus of ours. And the mantra, I would say, of how we've thought about it, how I've thought about it, is to say, like, we can't improve what we don't standardize. And so we've put in a lot of effort over the last 4 years around structured internal to organization development pathways. So specifically, we have a central team, i.e., folks who help support all of our schools, whether they are doing it as curriculum designers or our marketing team, or so basically anyone who does not directly sit within the school, but is in support of the school. And we call that functions. And then we have leaders within our school. And so we think of leaders as anyone who's sort of an associate manager and up. So we call them deans in our context, but they're often known as like assistant principals or deputies. So all the way through school leader. And what we've done over the last 4 years, launching in 2019, is we have many internal programs, but 3 of them that I think are most maybe interesting to talk about here is what we call our emerging leaders programming. And we have kind of 3 pathways to that. So the first one is what we call ELP core. And our core programming is all managers, whether you are marketing or admissions or a school-based person. This is content and leadership development that we think is pertinent to everyone. It covers everything from general leadership skills, cultural leadership skills, our mission, vision, and why that's particularly important. The hope being that everyone who's speaking within the organization is developing the same language, the same skills. It's run predominantly by our most senior leaders within the organization. And we cover a wide range. So that's for everybody. And then we have academic leaders, and those are, again, associate deans and above. So they might be assistant principals and deputies. And we have about 9 to 15 sessions a year that's really focused in on instructional leadership skills. So that's much more content development, for lack of a better term. So this is where we're doing the bulk of our work around observation and feedback. This is where we're doing the bulk of our work around data-driven instruction. So in our early days, where maybe we outsourced that, or there were a couple of people who were kind of coaching that process, what we've done over the last 4 years is really actually build our own internal engine for replicating systems and processes across schools. So all of our schools across both regions come together, sometimes all together, or if not by region. We have an arc of development. So let's say it's data-driven instruction. It's mostly led by our most senior academic folks. And we go through an arc of professional development of curriculum that we've developed and adapted from different places. And then the last one I would say is new manager. So where I think we've learned a lot of painful lessons is continuous onboarding. So we're usually very good about it, or we were at the beginning of the year. And so when you join as a fresh manager in marketing or in academics, we have an awesome onboarding, and then we were losing the thread. And so we have a set of curriculum that we get through if you are new to Nova Pioneer or you're new to your role. And so the content that we think just to accelerate onboarding over a period of time that folks would be going through. So those are the ways we've tried to think about it. And we have, I would say, for sure, if you're in a school-based role, you have way more professional development and alignment because that's where we have the most need for leaders. So we're opening new schools. We need new school leaders. We need new managers, but we also have a hefty amount of time where leaders across the org are actually working together, because I think we found that synergy supports everybody's development the fastest. So I'll pause there.
Thank you. That's really interesting, especially what you were saying about moving it internally and some of those lessons. And it would be great to come back to that in the discussion and build on maybe what those learnings were and what the benefits of moving things internally are. I think we're okay. If anybody had a question at this moment, there's probably time if someone wanted to ask anything now. If there's no pressing questions, I'll move on. But if anyone did have something, I'll just pause. Okay, thank you, Rahel. We'll come back to you very soon. Ghazala, I would love to ask you next, because TCF is such a large organisation, and I know you've got this values and behaviours framework, and I'd love to know how that guides your approach to leadership development and development pathways.
Thank you very much, Steph. I think I'll just start off maybe just a little bit about DCF, because a lot of people may not know about the organization. As you said, we are a large organization. It's nearly around 27 years old organization that we kind of built with the clear understanding and vision that education brings the change that we need to see. And I think that was, the mantra that we followed on, saying that if we educate the people, then we'll see the change in the country, which I believe would be pretty much, the kind of mantra that most people would follow anyway. If I were to just very quickly talk about the size, we're around, at this point in time, around 1,900 or 1,900 school units with around 285,000 children, students in our network, which runs across Pakistan. Interesting fact is that we employ around 13,000 faculty, 99% of which are women, which may make us one of the biggest women employers in the country as well. So while yes, the focus is on education, there's also this particular added collateral benefit, I would say, of empowering women financially and economically as to some extent as well. We do try and endeavor for 50-50% split of gender in our student population as well, to ensure we're providing services to both girls and boys as we move along. To your question, Steph, I think indeed development is something which I would say is kind of rooted into our values and behaviors. We recently deployed this across the network. Basically, we have 4 values in TCF: sincerity, service, beauty, and positive conduct. And there's like 3 behaviors with each value. And I think when I look at development and I was thinking about what to say, I would kind of zoom into our value, which is known as beauty, which we define as follows: we constantly seek to beautify and improve what we do. And that kind of resonates with leadership development, with development pathways, with continuous improvement in everything we do, right? And if you look at the 3 behaviors between these, within this value of beauty, we basically have mastery, finesse, and continuous improvement. Mastery being continually developing capabilities to realize full potential in ourselves as well as others. So again, I did connect to development. Finesse being focusing on attention to detail and excellence in action, and continuous improvement of having a compelling desire to better our work continuously through innovative solutions. So if you look at the values and behaviors, and if you look at, zoom into beauty as one of the values and the 3 behaviors associated there, that kind of, just becomes part of our culture in terms of wanting to continuously improve and develop our people. Similar to Nova, I would say we have both areas. So we have obviously schools, and given that we have around 1,900 school units, we're looking at around some principals handle more than 1 school unit. So we have around 12 to 1,300 principals that we are wanting to cater for. And then we have a large organization which includes, all the other management staff that we have, which would be coming right from our area managers, which handle this large network, our area education managers who handle this large network, up to all the normal functions / departments that exist, like finance, HR, marketing, you name it. Right. So those are 2 different areas that we also cater for as far as development is concerned. Similar to Nova, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of, riding on your conversation, Rahel. There is a central team. So when we look at the development of principals, for example, within DCF, there is a central group that kind of manages and looks at what are the requirements, what are the things that we need to kind of build the capabilities on. A lot of the material that we prepare is all in-house. And what we do basically is we have a yearly, what we call Principal Academy, which is basically our linchpin in terms of developing the capability of these principals. It's usually held every summer, spans between 7 to 9 days. We've recently completed the 13th year of managing this Principal Academy. So what we call Principal Academy 13 has just been completed. Basically, we're looking at both skill-based as well as technical training related to education matters. If there are any new initiatives that are coming through, how are you going to execute this in schools? So a little bit of that content, but also a lot on team management, team motivation, how to provide constructive feedback, because they are, leaders of that cohort of people, typically far removed from the rest of the organization, because by definition we're in areas which are rural or are within the urban setting. They would be urban slums, so they are somewhat removed, and so it makes the principal having these capabilities of motivation, constructive feedback, team building, all of them is very important. So training on new initiatives, training on managing people, and then administrative topics. How do you handle the accounts ledger? How do you handle inventory of books and so on? So all of these different aspects are covered during Principal Academy for us to be able to further develop the principles as we move along. If I keep talking about principals, we also help them become trainers as well, to be able to conduct what we call a 5 to 6 day inset sessions on pedagogy for teachers, so that they can then foster a culture of care and growth within their schools, implement the new TCF policies through the teachers, and revised programs as well. So comprehensive 8-9 days, as I said, which covers these different aspects for our principals. What we do pride in, actually, and we do have a program there which is called the Senior Teacher Program, which basically is allows this a particular teacher to then gain a little bit more knowledge of how what is a day in a principal's life, and get a little bit more training on the different things that she does, in order for then us to kind of groom them to become our next principals. And so that program has also kicked in recently, and allows us to kind of develop our teachers to become principals as we move forward. So that's kind of the framework for the principals. And as I said, it covers generally the principals, but we also have, as I said, through the principals, a 5-6 day inset training for pedagogy for teachers as well. So developing them, and then the Senior Teacher Program to develop our teachers to become the next principals as well. When I move over to management, the focus area is our area education managers, to whom the principals report. Typically, we would have an area education manager on handling around 25, and in some cases up to 30 principals. And they are the people who then are, the key to the implementation of the academic and administrative policies on ground, as well as being the key coaches to the principal on an everyday basis. So yes, there's a Principal Academy, which happens every summer for 7 to 9 days. But on a day-to-day basis, because a lot of the development, I'm sure we're all aware, happens through the regular on-the-job experiences that you get, and the regular on-the-job coaching that you receive. So the AEMs, therefore, the area education managers, therefore becomes a very important role to bring, to help the principals be able to implement the policies, but also to coach them in terms of softer skills and managing and so on. They're also the people, the area education managers, who also bring the on-ground realities back to the offices, as I said, to the central team, to see how to influence any differences in initiatives that we may need to take, or new programs that we may need to bring, or just simple policies, even HR policies for that matter, to change them in order to continuously improve our methodology and our work. So therefore, the focus on the AEMs, and there's a 3-pronged program that we have for to develop the capability of this group. It's basically revolves around the first one being individual learning, in which really what we have done is identified, after doing a needs assessment, looking at identifying courses from online platforms such as Coursera or others, sharing those with this cohort of people to go through, and then adding on to it reflection sessions at the end of the period that we expect them to go through these courses in order to build their skills and also to see how it's helped them during their work there. So that's like kind of individual learning. And then we have another one, which is we call the community sessions. These are short 2-hour sessions on topics of choice, facilitated online to allow room for discussion and learning. They could vary from anything to do with, just a short course on how to manage Excel better, to more topics of softer skills, like, how do you give feedback, and so on. So it varies. Again, we talk to their managers as well as themselves to see what would work. Do these once in a quarter, if I'm not wrong. And quick sessions, which allows them to just engage a little bit, spend a little bit of time on their own grooming and their own development. And the last one is more of a larger session, which we call the Education Leaders Academy, which is what I was busy in last week, actually. We try to do it once in 18 months. It's a big cohort of people that we bring on. It's a week-long event. Topics are technical and soft skills as well. Here, we also sometimes use external consultants to help us facilitate sessions. It allows for networking within teams as well, while building capability, and that in itself adds a lot of value, because you kind of share best practices and so on and so forth as well. So that's the management staff. I do want to say that several principals have actually moved on to AEM roles, and then from area education manager roles, they further moved on to regional education manager roles as well. So it's good to see that the development work that we do enables people to move in their careers higher into management roles. For overall management capability, I'm actually going to, right after this call, going to kind of reach out to Nova as well. We're working on a capability program for management right now. I don't have a lot to share here, but the way that we're looking at it is to develop a leadership competency framework for TCF, based on which we come up with a management capability program. The initial discussions that we've had is very close. Early leaders, future leaders, new managers, kind of, general framework. But it's something that is in the initial stages of conversation. And we'd like to build that on. We'll probably be using Sketima's care and growth model as our leadership framework, but building upon that. So let me pause here. That's basically a quick rundown on how we look at development, both for schools and management.
Thank you. That's so comprehensive and gives a sense of just how big your organization is. And I think what you were saying is relevant for any organization, but also it made me think of organizations in the stage of development who might be writing out their values and behaviors and thinking about this ethos they want to generate and how they could construct a clear link between that and how they want to run their leadership development programs. So I know there's a couple of questions in the chat and we'll jump to that in our discussion section. I'd like to now move on to Philippa, if that's okay. So Philippa is our internal expert at GSF, an organisation which is growing. So my question for Philippa is, how do you think of leadership development and development pathways in a growing organisation?
Thanks, Steph. I just want to point out before I start talking, I'm not going to introduce GSF. I presume that most people here have an idea of who we are and what we do. But also, I wanted to point out that I'm actually very new myself to GSF. So most of what I'm talking about will be based on experiences in previous organizations of a similar size. And I wanted to start out by flagging that despite these incredible examples that we've just heard from the first two speakers, often younger, smaller, growing organizations will need to be thinking about leadership development and filling leadership gaps in the same way they need to do lots of other things, which is frequently a little bit on the fly, without the time or the resource to plan as much as you might like or develop all the things that you might want to have in an ideal world. And there's often a bit of a balancing act and a bit of a juggling act to be done between thinking about the, what you'd ideally like to have in place and where you want your leadership journey to be going over the next 5 years, or your organization to be going over the next 10 years, and the reality that maybe you've grown so fast, you've got a new department that needs a leader, or your founding CEO has left and you need to find somebody to fill that spot. And just to acknowledge that although we're talking today about internal development, it is also legitimate and in some circumstances likely that you might need to hire externally, as well as be able to deliver if you haven't got the people internally, or it doesn't feel like that's going to be possible. So we're not going to talk about that today, but I just wanted to acknowledge that. If you are in a position to be planning ahead and thinking about your leadership pipeline before you need to fill a post, I think it's helpful in the context of a small organization to think of it as an extension of your existing professional development framework, or if you're starting even further back down that journey, to develop your professional development framework with leadership and management skills baked in from the beginning. The organization that I've just come from was 12 people when I joined it, and in the 2.5 years I was there grew to 40 people. So we went through a journey of, everything had been a little bit ad hoc. We need a bit more structure, we need a bit of a framework in here, but it also needs to be manageable in the context of a team of that size. So I'm just going to share my screen really quickly to give an example of something that I want to talk about to show that it doesn't happen. Working. So this is a framework that we developed that applied to all roles across the whole organization. So anybody, regardless of their team or function, and regardless of the level of their role, from the most junior up to the CEO, would have been, we considered as an organization, the culture, the purpose of the organization, the kind of things, skill sets that we wanted to see demonstrated by everybody in these buckets, these broad frameworks, I guess. And then we defined in detail by role. I know you won't be able to see the detail of this, but defined in detail what that would mean at every level of the organization. And like I said, we built leadership and management into this from the beginning. So whether you're the most junior member of the team or you're the CEO, it is possible for you to be thinking about and developing your leadership skills, your management skills. So if you're the most junior member of the team, you might be looking at how you manage a project, or how you lead the engagement of your peers in a project. And the intention, I'm going to stop sharing because it's nicer to be able to see your faces. But the intention with the framework was to give everyone in the organization the transparency to be able to demonstrate at their existing level, wherever in the organization, to understand what excellence looks like, and to be able to demonstrate it, whether that's in your annual review meeting with your manager or what have you, to have a clear framework in which everyone's talking the same language, judged, kind of being assessed on the same criteria. But also to give transparency and visibility to everyone, again, top or bottom of the organization, about what the next level would look like. So if you're able to demonstrate right now that you can lead a project in your current role, what would the next level up look like? So that it was clear across the organization what we were expecting from everybody, which has a lot of other advantages, which is also a topic for another day. But it enabled people to see what the next stage would look like and be consistently working towards it, whether that was administrator to manager or director to CEO. And there was a parallel set of frameworks and tools to guide managers in having regular growth and development conversations with their teams, to support individuals to access the opportunities that they might need to build the next skill set, to demonstrate or to try out things from the kind of the level above, so that everybody's got that kind of consistency and transparency. And the intention of the framework is to promote that growth, and is to support individuals to see where they want to be aiming for and what is needed for them to be able to get there. I also want to flag that it's often the case that not everybody wants to be a person manager or a leader, and that it's also important to be able to develop through an organization and get recognition and credibility for your technical skills or whatever it might be in parallel. So this is, it's an approach that is a little bit more manageable for a small organization. It works across the organization. No framework is perfect. And they all take time to both to develop and to embed, and they kind of work better for some people than others. And it takes, ironically, good leadership and management to be able to kind of develop your next generation of good leaders and managers. But having a kind of a framework, however simple, helps. To Rahel's point, if you haven't got something standardized, it's really difficult to work to improve it. So if everyone can see what's expected and work towards their next level, it gives them everyone an opportunity both to reflect on their own performance. It's also really helpful when it comes to providing feedback, whether it's 360 feedback to someone more senior or regular feedback to people within your team. And then the final point that I wanted to make, and again, I think this is particularly true of smaller organizations, is if you are promoting someone into a senior leadership post, you're maybe promoting, whether it's into a department director or the actual kind of leader of the organization, it's really important to remember that the leadership promotion journey doesn't end when they sign the contract for the new role. That is the beginning of the next stage of their leadership journey. So I think it's really important. It's easy to think that because they're internal, if you've internally promoted someone, that they know the organization, they'll get it, they'll know what needs to be done. And I think it's really important to consider an internal kind of onboarding process to the new role, to support people to transition their relationships with people who were their peers into a leadership role in that context, to think about opportunities for them to access external mentoring, coaching, support, if it's not something that you're able to offer internally, to encourage them to access peer group support. It's not intentionally a plug for GSF, but organizations, or accessing opportunities to discuss leadership challenges with people who are going through a similar thing or have been through a similar process, is also a really valuable kind of tool to offer a new leader, particularly if you don't have the internal infrastructure to have lots of the amazing things that Ghazala was talking about in terms of the opportunities for multiple leaders to come together and discuss and grow. If you're a small organization, sometimes those things are simply not an option, but it's important to remember that leadership journey can be a really lonely one, and to help people to access support from wherever is most appropriate. I think that's all I wanted to say for now.
Thank you so much. Lots of good advice there, and hopefully we can build on that in our discussion section, which brings me to that stage. Before we do, may I just ask for one moment, if you can switch on cameras, if we could very quickly, while we're just all together on the screen, take a screenshot, and then we'll jump into our discussion section. Thank you so much. I'll just give you a couple of seconds if you can. And then maybe in 3, 2, 1. Thank you, everybody. Okay, so back to being serious. So in our discussion today, this is really for you to ask any questions, and as specific as you like, about your organizations around this topic, because hopefully you can take something away today that you actually can apply. And I've got a few questions based on what our experts have been saying. I'm sure you all have. So I want to just pass it over to you guys, first of all, to say, is there anything specific you've come with today about your own organizations you'd like to ask, or do you have a question maybe for our experts based on what they've been sharing and you'd like to hear a bit more? It's really over to you to ask what you would like. I'm also going to check the chat, so if you prefer to write, that's fine as well. But please feel free to unmute and shout out if you have something. I think there was a question earlier. I'm just checking if we answered it. Yeah, in the chat. Oh, Phyllis, you had a question. I'm not sure if you're still with us, but Phyllis said, currently we have one school for children with neurodiversity. So she was introducing her organization, and she was saying that they engage with a wide number of educators in Ghazala County on teaching the understanding of dyslexia to support identified learners, focusing on inclusive education, with 25 teachers. Did you want to tell us a little bit more about your organisation, Phyllis, and how you're approaching leadership?
Thank you. Actually, the purpose for that different script is actually to introduce myself. Not really was it, you had said we say where we are from the organization. That's what was that was for. About leadership, I think we are having challenges that we need to actually, our approach is that we have the organization that does the mobilization and the training and arrangement, but we also have the school. So we engage the teachers or trainers on a need basis when we go to train other schools, but we have now the teachers who are in the school. How we merge that is really where we need to understand how to do that leadership, where we have the organization learning separately and also engaging the teachers in the schools. Yeah.
Rahel, you're nodding your head. Do you relate to that?
Yeah, I'm making a mental note of everyone I'm going to Google after this. And really important work as a particularly more inclusive education and how to support and train teachers around that. Particularly in Kenya is a conversation I'd love to pick up after. So that was just me nodding vigorously to remember that.
Yes, and if you do want to connect, by the way, please feel free to drop emails in the chat and then you can connect with one another, or I can help connect you afterwards. Ira, you have your hand up.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for everything you've shared so far. So I'm from Justice Rising, and we operate in the context of protracted conflict and crisis, which means that we are almost always firefighting in at like a quite critical level. And so without really wanting like a cheat code, as it were, I did want to ask, like, if there were three, if like in the, and everyone's kind of like been through like a COVID crisis. During that COVID crisis, like, what were the leadership development activities that you doubled down on? Like, if there were things that you let go, like what could you not stop doing? And in that, like, maybe another way of framing that question would be, like, if you had to pick 2 or 3 like activities or ways of work or approaches that regardless of whether you know the school was burning down, like, this is like you would carry on doing these, like, what would those 3 be?
My 3 might change as I think about it more, but I think the first one that COVID forced us, we were a very high touch organization before COVID. So all professional development happened in person. It felt like if we weren't physically in the same room, it was like there would be loss, you know? And I think what COVID kind of forced us was to move a lot of our programming online. Which I would imagine if you are in other much larger organizations or more regionally diverse organizations, that's already built into how you guys operate. But I found that while we do crave the in-person connection still, and we have periodically have it, like, you can get a lot out of 2 hours online in a way that I don't think we would have believed pre-COVID. Like, and so I think the first one is it's really allowed us to actually broaden our development and enrich it in ways that our physical proximity were going to be limiting factors post-COVID. So I think that's something that really was a net positive. The biggest space where we have, I mean, we continue to do academic, but just a lot more on the general education side, a lot more on understanding the mechanics of our organization. I think that, as I imagine all of your schools, like, they were really traumatic interruptions to our ability to operate, to having to restructure, to understanding like the larger global context we were in, that trickled down to whether teachers have jobs or we have to close a school, or, which thankfully we didn't have to, but I think we found a lot for our senior leaders, and again, I would include like managers and above, their ability to narrate the journey that the organization was on became infinitely more important when there was a crisis, because it couldn't be like, well, Rahel said or Chinese said, but their level of ownership and understanding and what does this mean in ways that I think before then we were kind of protecting, like, and out of desire to not distract people. But then all of a sudden they became actually the most important people to communicate. What are the constraints? What are the challenges? How are we organizationally making sense of that? So I would say for all leaders that became really important, as well as just like emotional well-being, capacity to work with people in trauma, stress management. Like we do a lot more of that than we did maybe pre-COVID. We were always like a startup mode. But I find even as we look into next year and how to keep iterating, where I think we continue to struggle as relatively new managers who have to do really human work. We operationalize the hell out of like instructional leadership and all of this stuff so they can do that, but trying to support other folks in doing the work, I think we continue to really struggle. And so that's been a place where we've had to really like rethink how we do that.
If I can add on this one, I think, you've really pinpointed the three areas, which as I was thinking on it, thinking about that as well. So, online communication and so on. So I think that's very important as well, for us as well. Honestly, if I focus on the second part of your question, or the second scenario of your question, which was like, if everything was going wrong, where would you focus on? And I think that is reflective in the initial conversation that I had, right? So when we look at an organization and say, what is it that we're here to deliver? We're here to deliver education. And hence that makes the school and the principal the most important cohort of people, or cohort of employees that we need to focus on. And so if there was fires burning, which they are, and that's why we haven't focused on management, but we have focused on area education managers, as I said. If I were to choose, I'd probably say, okay, let me continue to focus on my principals. If I run short of money or whatever it may be, right? Where would I kind of, what would be my cascading choices that I would make? I'd probably put principals right at the top of it, because then they can drive things within the school. So how do I continuously build my principals, and then come to teachers, and then probably move to management? That's how I would think about this, because I think that they become the linchpins of running a smooth program on ground. To the communication piece, Rahel, that you were talking about earlier. I think during COVID and what we continued from that was more communication on what TCF is all about. And so we instituted again online these quarterly, what we would call quarterly webinars, which is open to all employees to join, which just every quarter just tells anybody who joins what TCF has been up to in the past quarter, focusing into one or two key areas. And I feel that allows for the connect to develop between these remote schools, which are far away, to what's actually happening in the in the glass towers or the crystal towers of the office. Although I have to say the TCF by far, the head office, is not a glass or a crystal tower, but still, that particular piece of saying that, okay, what's happening up there kind of brings it closer to home, and makes people realize a lot about, what is it, the work that's happening in this area as well. So I don't know if that was really related to your question or not, but I just thought of sharing it when we were talking about communication.
Philippa, did you want to add anything?
I was going to say very similar things, actually. I think the themes are really, the first thing that I wrote down was around kind of the importance of self-care and looking out for leaders and encouraging leaders to look out for themselves. That kind of concept of not being able to pour from an empty cup and so on becomes all the more critical in a critical situation. And the piece about prioritization and focus, and being willing to let some things go that were maybe part of your long-term strategic plan, that you need to just be willing to say, you know what, we'll park that for right now. These are the 3, 5 things that we're gonna focus on, and making that okay. And then the communication piece, which you both mentioned as well, I think there's something very leveling and humanizing about the shared experience of a crisis, and there's something about a leader being able to engage with their team about what is going on in the organization, but also how those individuals are experiencing it, that is much more leveling. It's a different type of communication, I think. In some cases, it's how are you experiencing what's going, using the COVID example, what is going on for you at home, as well as how can you engage with what is going on for us as an organization, becomes a really important thing, I think.
Adria, I know you've got your hand up. I'll come to you in a second. I was just going to add on to that and say, when you've all been talking, one thing that's come to my mind is, like, I was a teacher before, and I think what you were saying about the principal and the effect coming down, you really do feel in the classroom the effects of that. And I think the children feel it as well. And they ask questions sometimes, why do we do that at school? Why is it like that? Why do we have to? Because the culture really comes down that far. So I think there's almost even more of a responsibility to get it right when you're working in education, because it really is affecting the children as well. Did anyone want to add to that or respond?
I just wanted to respond.
Yeah.
Just with just thank you for those answers, and I think that all of you kind of stressing the importance of communication and over communication almost is that really resonates, not because we do it right all the time, but as oh yeah, this is really a felt need in our organization. And then I guess one of the things I'm curious about going forwards for us is that it's not like we were stable before and then COVID hit. COVID relatively was a smaller crisis for us to handle. It's that the self-care piece and that emotional well-being, which is absolutely resonates and rings true, but what that looks like in a context where for a lot of our teachers and principals, all they have known is protracted conflict. And amidst that background, what that looks like is something for us to really spend some time picking apart and getting clarity on. And yeah, I'm probably spending time with our stakeholders to understand from their point of view what fills them up if you don't want to pour from an empty cup. So yeah, thank you very much.
Jay, you had your hand up before.
Thank you, Steph. Thank you for this rich conversation. I'm curious about one aspect of the development pathways about middle management. As organizations grow, but the middle managers often are seen as youngsters who have been in the education system for 4 or 5 years maybe, and they have many aspirations. So how do you have that aspect of a huge turnout at that point? Or second, do you have that conflicting narrative of they have many aspirations? How do you keep them there, or how do you create their pathways of leadership as the organizations continue to grow? And we are all about scale at many times and huge impact as well. So how do you navigate that? I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I think there's a piece about developing people into their first management role or that kind of middle management space, and about what happens next. I think in the context of the kind of smaller organization space that I was asked to bring to this conversation, it's a really interesting one. For me, I think we should all be individually and organizationally continually thinking about development of everybody. So that is about everybody learning and growing. Sometimes that means progressing up a hierarchy. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it means progressing your learning and your expertise in the space that you occupy. Different things are right for different people. I think one of the challenges in small organizations particularly is you tend to have many more middle managers, however you want to describe that, than there are available spaces in the next stage. So depending on how your organization is structured, whether you're talking about teachers and heads of department, or whether you're talking about managers and directors, or whatever that looks like, the traditional organization is quite triangular. So there ends up being potentially a bottleneck and a tension between the needs and interests and potential of the individual and the needs and interests and scope for the organization to provide that opportunity for growth. And I don't know where this came from. I feel like I saw it in a New York Times cartoon or something, but this was a kind of fairly famous quote about an internal conversation asking somebody like, well, you know, what happens if we invest in the development of our people and then they leave? And the response is, well, what happens if we don't invest and they stay? So I think there has to be a realistic conversation sometimes about a positive outcome for both individual and organization. Sometimes is progression up and sometimes is progression out, and go with our blessing and take what you've learned. That's not what any organization ideally wants to see, but if it's the right for the individual, it's probably sometimes can also be right for the organization.
So if I may add to that, I'm sorry, Rahel, did you want to say something?
Go for it. No,
Okay.
Go for it.
So very interesting conversation this is, and I think I really like what you say. You progress up or you progress out. And one of the things I've learned, and I for this particular piece, I'll probably bank on a little bit of my previous experience also with another corporate organization, but wanted to kind of bring it here. One of the things I've learned in TCF, and we have a very high attrition rate, both in school and management, goes up to 25% in certain years. That's huge. But I think what I've learned here is this whole thing of progressing out and being the NGO or the NPO that we are. If our people are picked up, whether they're teachers or principals or management at any level, picked up by other organizations, we almost give them the blessings to say, great, we did a good job, and that's why they're being picked up. And so they'll go and add value elsewhere, which is just as good, use of our time as well. So if our trained teachers, which we believe we do spend a lot of time in their development and training, if they become teachers in another organization, another school, that at least take that learning with them and do the same thing with students in another school, more power to them, good. So I think that concept needs to be a little bit clearer as well. Having said that, I think the whole conversation about middle management growing, I think, as you said, in traditional organizations, continues to be a dilemma, I would say, that many organizations face. So even when I was in Procter & Gamble, handling, corporate organization, typical stuff, you would always see that you had a lot of mid to high potential people, but the slots up there were less. And as the slots up there become lesser, what you're trying to do is really trying to retain the best of the best through progression for them. And yes, in that particular competitive environment, you tend to lose some. That would be a situation. The only other thing I wanted to add here was probably a little bit about how do you grow people laterally as well. So progressing up, progressing out, but also laterally. And that's one of the things that we're actually now experimenting with as far as TCF is concerned, with middle management as well, where we've taken people from education design, put them into supply chain to see how they can grow, to become more all-rounded individuals and develop them in that way. New skills, new technical aspects to learn from, making them overall managers to then groom them up into more senior positions as well. So yeah, sorry, Rahel, if I took too much time.
No, maybe the only thing I would add, I mean, I think the longer we operate, the more okay I've grown with people who go on to do amazing things beyond Nova Pioneer, particularly because we're growing smaller than we anticipated. And so if folks are leaving us to go run other amazing organizations for kids, I think that's a win. Where I've been thinking a lot about, maybe as a nuance to the conversation that's been happening, is over the last year and a half, we've had a number of middle managers who have gone through process to become school leaders and haven't been successful. And I think that, and these are people who are really strong, who we do want to retain, but aren't ready yet. And so a lot of our conversations internally has been, where are we failing to develop? Because if they are eager, they're mission aligned, they're generally doing a good job, but they're not yet ready, like, what does that mean that we're saying, you know? And so I think that's been a bit of the work and the self-reflection, and to be more nuanced in the skills that we're saying a principal actually needs, that these folks aren't quite there yet, and to try to be really narrow on what those skills are so we can train more effectively around those, because I think that's more organizational shortcoming than their willingness to grow or their demonstration of growth. And so that, I think, maybe also looking at that where the ambition is there, the desire is there, the role is there, but they are not yet ready. What does that mean, and how do we close that gap?
Thank you. I love this idea of encouraging people to like continue their journey, even if it's somewhere else, like for the overall benefit. I'm so sorry that we're running out of time, because it's been such an interesting session, and I would encourage anyone who has further questions to share them with our experts after. I'm going to share my screen again so that you can see the contact details of our experts, and we're going to be dropping those in the chat for you as well. We also have a poll that we're about to launch. If you wouldn't mind, just in the remaining couple of minutes of the session, if you could please fill out the questions to tell us what you thought of today, and to share with us any topics you would like to see us cover in the future, that would be great. And I just want to take the opportunity as well to say a big thank you to our experts again. I think it's been absolutely great to have your expertise. And to everyone who's joined and asked questions, and hopefully we can continue the conversation. Can everybody see the poll? Not yet. It has opened up, but I wonder, could one of my colleagues try to open it? Is it working now?
It's up now. Yeah.
Perfect.
Oh, no.
No?
Steph, maybe closing the screen may help. Just
If I stop sharing?
yeah, maybe that would help.
Let's try again. Is it working?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. Yes, so we'll have contact details in the chat. I'm happy to facilitate any connections, so if anyone would like to get introduced. But one more big thank you to Philippa, Rahel and Ghazala. Really appreciate your time and effort today. And thank you everyone for joining. I think there'll be some great learnings and takeaways. We'll have future Ask the Expert sessions, so keep an eye out on our newsletter to hear about those. Contact me if you'd like to be an expert in a future session as well. And just, yeah, please join another one, fill out the poll in your own time, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.